This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Wednesday, July 29th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Zimbabwean Agriculture Minister Perrance Shiri, 65, has died Wednesday, according to a statement from President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Government sources say Shiri, who commanded the nation's Air Force for a quarter century until he joined the government in 2017, was admitted to hospital on Tuesday. The retired general is recognized as a key planner in the coup of former President Robert Mugabe in 2017. According to Reuters and domestic media reports, Shiri died from complications linked to COVID-19, which has infected over 2,800 people and killed at least 40 in Zimbabwe. Elsewhere, Islam's holiest observance is underway Wednesday as a small group of pilgrims arrived in Mecca to begin the Hajj, which has been dramatically scaled back due to the coronavirus pandemic. Instead of the 2 million plus people from around the world that normally make the required once-in-a-lifetime journey to Islam's holiest site, Saudi Arabia has barred all international travelers from entering the kingdom to perform the Hajj, limiting the attendees to just 1,000 people made up of Saudi nationals and foreign residents who were pre-selected weeks ago. Saudi Arabia has over 270,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases and nearly 2,800 deaths, according to Johns Hopkins University data. The World Health Organization is warning against complacency about new coronavirus transmission in the Northern Hemisphere summer, saying this virus does not behave like influenza that tended to follow seasonal trends. Emma McCarthy reports.
The World Health Organization is warning against complacency about new coronavirus transmissions in the Northern Hemisphere summer, saying that this virus did not behave like influenza that tended to follow seasonal trends. WHO spokeswoman Margaret Harris.
People are still thinking about seasons. What we all need to get our heads around is this is a new virus and it's behaving, even though it's a respiratory virus, and even though respiratory viruses in the past did tend to do this, different seasonal waves, this one is behaving differently. This one is one we have to be aware is learning about us as we're learning about it.
Harris also warned against thinking in terms of virus waves, saying that instead it's going to be one big wave.
That was Emma McCarthy of Reuters reporting. Indian cities, long a magnet for migrant workers, may be losing their lure for the millions of people who have joined the exodus back to their villages during the COVID-19 pandemic, in the biggest reverse migration witnessed in India, as cities continue to grapple with rising infections and millions lose jobs. Many are opting to start life all over again in the safer environment of their villages. And Jana Pasricha reports.
Rearing cows is not the work Rapani Bhatt is accustomed to. He was employed in a call center in Chandigarh city. Now he hopes the cattle shed he built after returning to his village will provide a livelihood. He lost his job during the COVID-19 pandemic.
This time pe hamare liye ek business opportunity.
I see this as a business opportunity because everything is shut due to the coronavirus. We feel far safer at home. We can use this milk and sell it also.
Thousands in North India's Chamba Valley, like Bhatt, had migrated to cities, lured by higher wages. Now they are back, hoping to rebuild their lives closer home as the pandemic triggers a mass reverse migration. Many have lost jobs. Others are seeking a haven in these hillsides where the virus is still not a threat. Many are working in government-sponsored projects to build new pathways or bridges across rivers. Others are opting to raise cattle or goats. Some are reclaiming forgotten patches of land to farm.
I got money to level the land. It was difficult to cultivate because of the slope, but now I will be able to grow more crops.
They are getting financial assistance under a government initiative to create livelihood opportunities for migrants and boost rural economies.
Even though their earning may be less, but even the expenditure is low. So their net earning here is much, much better. And secondly, they are close to their homes. And thirdly, they can engage themselves in some gainful self-employment. So this self-employment is the crux of rural development.
The return of migrants could be a win-win, hopes this teacher who has built an animal shed after losing his job in a town.
They bring back what they picked up in cities. For example, cleanliness standards. That will influence the elderly and the illiterate and help transform villages.
This village elder has some canny words of advice.
They have to prepare to slug. They can't sit there and earn money.
They are doing it, preferring the sanctuary of their homes as the coronavirus rages in cities.
There is no fear about going out and meeting people in the village. The environment is healthy. There is no danger from the virus here.
But will they stay back in the villages when the threat passes?
It's their will and it's their choice. So let's see how it turns out.
Only time will tell if glitzy cities lure them again or they build their future on these hillsides. Anjana Pasricha for VOA News, New Delhi.
As businesses start to reopen amid the COVID-19 pandemic, some are turning to technology to figure out how to make workplaces safer. Michelle Quinn reports on the trade-offs.
Before the pandemic, this sensor mounted over a door had one job: let building managers know how office space, bathrooms, cafeterias were being used. Now that information is helping companies figure out how to make workplaces safe.
There's a sensor that gets mounted above a point of entry, and as people enter and exit, we use infrared laser light and a whole bunch of really cool algorithms to both generate and analyze depth data. And that depth data gives us a really clear understanding of how many people enter and exit a space.
Companies are turning to technology like this as they try to figure out how to get people safely back to work. Drones that monitor from the air social distancing and face mask wearing. Wearable devices that buzz when employees are too close for too long. The pandemic has accelerated employers' experimentation with tech in the workplace.
We really need new experimentation, especially around worker health and safety. But we have to tread really carefully here because otherwise we could risk institutionalizing things, have negative consequences for workers in their workplaces.
One of those potential consequences? Increased surveillance of employees that erodes their sense of privacy. Unlike cameras inside workplaces, density sensor doesn't identify individuals.
There's a fine line there, and you can still maintain people's safety without removing their privacy.
Density works with companies, universities, and other organizations to prevent too many people pooling in one place.
When maybe a bathroom is full and people shouldn't go in there yet, or things like elevator lobbies or places where people tend to congregate.
Technology as gatekeeper. It may be a trade-off many will come to accept. Michelle Quinn, VOA News, San Francisco.
In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic that originated in China, U.S. President Donald Trump is adopting an increasingly hardline policy against Beijing, elevating U.S.-China policy as a major issue in the presidential election campaign. Trump has criticized his Democratic Party rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, as being soft on China. But as VOA's Brian Padden reports, Biden also portrays himself as tough on China and has criticized Trump's policies as inconsistent and ineffective.
In the past, President Trump touted his transactional relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping and progress towards a new trade agreement that would increase American agricultural exports. But Trump has taken a more hardline approach towards Beijing for downplaying the coronavirus outbreak when it first appeared in Wuhan.
What China's unleashed on the world, it's hard to even fathom.
The Trump administration on Wednesday forced the closure of China's consulate in Houston, Texas, accusing it of illegal spying and stealing American intellectual property. The U.S. has also imposed sanctions on China for alleged human rights violations against Muslim Uyghurs and its crackdown on civil liberties in Hong Kong. Advocates for diplomacy worry about Trump's new hardball strategy.
It's more coherently hostile and confrontational in ways that I think will harm U.S. interests.
Trump's hawkish former national security advisor turned critic John Bolton has also criticized the president's get tough on China policy, telling VOA it is driven solely by electoral politics.
I think Trump's relationship with Xi Jinping goes up and down depending on the prospects for Election Day. And if Trump wins re-election, I think Xi Jinping will be his big buddy once again.
Trump is now using his hardline China policy to attack his Democratic opponent, former Vice President Joe Biden, as being soft on China.
As Vice President, Biden opposed tariffs, and he was standing up for China. He didn't want to do anything to disrupt the relationship with China.
As President Barack Obama's vice president, Biden supported conditional engagement with China on trade and security issues.
We do not fear China's rise. We want to see China rise.
But the Obama administration also tried to contain Chinese aggression by increasing the U.S. military presence in the Pacific and strengthening regional alliances. Biden has criticized Trump for talking tough but taking weak actions that fail to deter China. Biden says he would impose stronger sanctions on China, but critics say he has no clear alternative strategy.
It strikes me that he doesn't really have a coherent philosophy of international politics or an internal vision, but that he, sort of responds, he follows the herd, so to speak.
The two campaigns have also accused each other of having family business ties to Chinese companies, posing possible conflicts of interest. Brian Patton, VOA News, Washington.
When it comes to elections, most Americans vote in person at neighborhood polling stations. That is likely to change in November's general election, when millions of people are expected to vote by mail, many for the first time because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here again is Michelle Quinn.
For election officials nationwide, it's time to get ready for the big event, Election Day 2020, when millions of voters decide who will be the next president. This year, voting itself presents an enormous challenge because of the pandemic. The response? Most states are greatly expanding voting by mail.
If we assume that somewhere between 65% and 75% of all ballots cast in the 2020 presidential election come by mail, that means that somewhere between 90 million and 105 million ballots might come through the mail. That's a very, very significant volume of mail.
Of course, there are numerous logistical and security challenges to voting by mail. Registering voters, for one, and then getting the right ballots to voters.
Sometimes you hear talk as if blank ballots are simply being sent out into the world almost willy-nilly, without control. And that's simply not the case.
Voters receive ballots that are specially printed for their precinct with barcodes with encoded information tied to the person's voter registration. After voting, the voter mails their ballot or takes it to a drop-off center. Then the county's voting software system goes to work. Digital scanners take images of the outside of the ballot to make sure the voter's signature on the outside matches the one the county has on file. A digital scanner scans the ballots and counting begins. Any anomaly, a missing or wrong signature, a stray mark, is sent to a team for review.
It's like a factory floor, right? They keep getting outsorted based on, I'd say it's quality control standards, because we have to look at the signature more closely.
Voters can track their ballot's progress, much like the way they can track a package being delivered via text messages or a ballot tracking app. The process is also anonymous. The ballot's envelope is separated from the actual ballot as it is being counted.
The voter's personal information and the concreteness of their reality have been physically dissociated from each other. That's a really critical step in our democracy in terms of protecting the secrecy and the privacy of the vote.
But voting by mail isn't a panacea. Not everyone who votes gets their ballots counted.
They arrive too late, or more importantly, they're postmarked too late, or the voter didn't sign the envelope, or the signature doesn't match sufficiently the voter's signature on file.
This year, the state has extended the window for mail-in ballots. Counties must contact voters to validate their signatures if there is a problem. Even with these reforms, Alexandra worries about one group, young and new voters.
They have 3 strikes against them. They are unfamiliar with voting. They are not very familiar with how the U.S. Postal Service works, and they're not used to making a signature.
Racing the clock, checking voter registrations, sending mailers to get the word out about how to vote by mail. That's what election officials are doing now. Some are warning final election results may not be known for weeks. Michelle Quinn, VOA News, San Francisco.
We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Linor Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
Let us be perfectly clear. All countries.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there is no information or evidence suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted by mosquitoes.
There are 2 published studies.
It is a respiratory virus which spreads primarily through droplets, generated when an infected person coughs or sneezes, or through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose.
This happens during pandemics in the past.
For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. As Thailand's economy struggles to recover from the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, renewed anti-government demonstrations are popping up across the country. Protesters are demanding amendments to the constitution, that parliament be dissolved, and a stop to the harassment of rights activists. Steve Sanford reports from Chiang Mai, Thailand.
So-called flash mobs have gained momentum in Thailand, with more than 40 anti-government rallies organized on short notice, since a massive anti-government demonstration was held in Bangkok on July 18th. Tech-savvy students have coordinated these gatherings at a moment's notice, such as this one on Sunday night, to avoid a security backlash. Protest leaders are worried that if they criticize the ruling class, they will be forced into exile, like some activists in the past, or worse, go missing.
It's a dark path. There's no clear path that we could take because the economy has created this overwhelming pressure for the younger generation to come out and be the leaders to demand all our rights back.
Many of the participants include high school and university students belonging to the groups Free Youth and the Union of Students of Thailand. Veteran activists say the young demonstrators should not be underestimated by the ruling government, who have used words like adorable to downplay the protests.
I see a big difference with this movement right now, that instead of going all the way to Bangkok, they set up groups in local areas everywhere. The advantage is that they can organize people in local areas. They don't need to spend so much money traveling by bus or train or plane to Bangkok.
In Thailand's north, farmers who supported the military-backed Palong Pracharat Party were promised guaranteed prices for their crops. But many have seen these promises broken, or at least put on hold, since the 2019 election and the coronavirus outbreak earlier this year. Now, some are supporting the protests.
I'm not entirely confident that the student movement will be successful with their protests, but I will support them. I want to see permanent change. I don't want things to go back to the same way as we used to be.
While the rallies gain recognition across the country, the government says it is setting up an extraordinary commission to open dialogue between demonstrators and the government. Steve Sanford for VOA News in Chiang Mai, Thailand.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr told lawmakers Tuesday federal intervention was needed to calm ongoing protests in the northwestern U.S. city of Portland, Oregon. Barr pushed back against congressional Democrats' accusations he has placed loyalty to President Donald Trump ahead of upholding the rule of law in the United States. VOA's Catherine Gibson reports from Capitol Hill.
2 months of protests in Portland now intensifying nightly into clashes between federal law enforcement and protesters around the city's federal courthouse. The controversial use of federal tactical units and reported arrests by unidentified federal authorities defended by the nation's top justice official Tuesday.
What unfolds nightly around the courthouse cannot reasonably be called protest. It is, by any objective measure, an assault on the government of the United States.
Across the nation, protesters say systematic racism is a serious problem in the country's policing. But Barr disputed that claim.
The number of unarmed black men killed by police so far this year is 8. The number of unarmed white men killed by police over the same period of time is 11. And the overall numbers of police shootings have been decreasing.
Barr's appearance marks the first in his time as Attorney General that he has appeared before the Democratic-controlled U.S. House of Representatives. And Democrats were ready.
Your tenure has been marked by a persistent war against the department's professional corps in an apparent attempt to secure favors for the president.
Democrats say the Attorney General's use of federal force is politically driven ahead of the November presidential election.
Americans are very suspicious of your motives here. There are those who believe you are sending federal law enforcement into these cities not to combat violent crime, but to help with the president's re-election efforts. The president has made clear that he wants conflict between protesters and police to be a central theme of his campaign.
Barr also defended Trump's June 1st clearing of protesters around the White House, saying it was necessary to protect the president, who later stood in front of the defaced St. John's Church for a photo opportunity. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
Years of conflict in Syria created millions of refugees in one of the world's worst ongoing humanitarian crises. Refugees live in crowded camps with limited access to food or land to grow crops. VOA's Arasha Basadi reports on a camp in Jordan where experts teach Syrian refugees how to farm in tight spaces.
Here at the Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, experts from England's University of Sheffield and the United Nations teach Syrian refugees sustainable farming. Hani Naser is head of social service projects for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees.
The UNHCR always tries to implement ideas that help the local Syrian community. The soil in this camp is not suitable for agriculture, so we decided to experiment with new technologies refugees can use here or when they return.
Refugees learn how to make the most of limited resources through hydroponic farming, where cups without soil hold seeds and sit in pipes with flowing water. Syrian refugee Hassan Gildes started living in this camp in 2012. He says the hydroponic process yields quality crops.
This project saves water and allows us to become self-sufficient in crowded or small spaces. The produce is 100% healthy, natural, and pure without chemicals or hormones.
Ahmad Zubi lives in the camp with his wife and 6 children. He says he's happy returning to his old career as a farmer.
I love working on this project because I enjoy farming. It is technologically advanced and the process is clean. Traditional agriculture is full of mud and sand. This is just water. We come clean and we leave clean.
The UNHCR says this hydroponic system uses 70 to 80% less water than traditional methods. Good for a country facing water shortages and a camp home to nearly 76,000 refugees, more than half of whom are children. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
Artist Dominick Cocozza is only 18 years old, but his painting of 2 migrant children holding a sign that reads, "Bring our mom back," is already being displayed at the U.S. Capitol. Another work of his is hanging in the Smithsonian Husson Museum. Adopted from Guatemala, Dominick focuses his work around the U.S. immigration crisis, Maxim Moskalkov talked with the young artist.
Two young children, a boy and a girl, hold a sign that reads "Bring Our Mom Back." This painting, called simply Immigration, is the work of an 18-year-old Dominick Cocozza and has already made its way to the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. In 2019, Cocozza won in the annual art competition organized by the U.S. Congress.
I concentrated on the United States immigration crisis, and that was something that I felt deserved an empathetic and legal solution. So when I saw kids that, looked like me when I was younger, behind cages and in bars and stuff, it was really jaw-dropping that was even an issue that even had to be discussed. I couldn't believe that was a thing that was happening.
Cocozza says his work was inspired by the family separation policy executed at the U.S.-Mexican border. His works did not go unnoticed. A Virginia congressman, Don Bayer, noticed the paintings, and suddenly the basement of Cocozza's parents' home, where the young man worked, was filled with journalists.
It's supposed to be a representation of the sadness that these kids were feeling. It was really an emotional painting that I wanted to portray.
Dominick and his sister were born in Guatemala, but were adopted by an American family when they were still infants. Today, the young artists live in Arlington, just a few kilometers away from the U.S. Capitol. But despite all that, he never forgets about where he came from.
It's a model of my family. I live in a primarily white community, so for me that was my personal difference. And so I have my sister and me, who were adopted from Guatemala as infants, painted a different color than the rest of the rocks. And these rocks are supposed to represent different families in their communities. And then the water represents how communities are always changing and never the same.
This painting also won in a competition held by the Smithsonian and was exhibited at the Hirshhorn Museum in downtown D.C. For many years now, seasoned artist Gavin Glakas has been Dominick's mentor.
He's a very impressive young man, and he has that combination of real drive to learn and improve and further his talent level. It'll be fascinating to see where he goes with his work and career. He's obviously interested in those issues.
Dominick has been painting since he was small. When he just started school, he was already invited to take part in local exhibits.
That was an indication that it wasn't just his mom thinking he had some talent. There were other people saying, we'd like to take his work and show it in the county. And after a couple of years of that, I approached the school and said, do you think that he may be gifted in visual arts? And they said, we think so. Why don't you fill out the application and we'll go through the formal process.
In the fall of 2020, Dominick Cocozza will start his education at the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the oldest art schools in the country. Maxim Moskalkov for VOA News, Arlington, Virginia.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.